if there's a conflict between US and China over Taiwan, what Singapore will do?
Oh, Singapore will not take sides. Singapore will not take sides.
Really? Singapore has American military base.
And I think in many European countries, you will find right-wing parties gaining in strength. And the European transatlantic link will weaken. And if Trump comes in, it will weaken even further.
喺睇片之前，大家記得分享、讚好同訂閱卓見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁你就唔會錯過我哋嘅最新影片。
Can China stand a weakened Russia? And can America stand a weakened Israel?
On Ukraine, China's position is like 60-40, sometimes 55-45. Then it became 60-40 again. China doesn't want Russia to collapse, because if it collapses, then the entire force of the West will be on China. So China has a vested interest in keeping Russia going. But at the same time, China does not want to antagonize Europe. So it doesn't want to get involved in this intra-Slavic conflict. So it triangulates a very precise position of having weight on both legs, but a bit more on one than on the other. With Israel and America, much of it is as a result of the Jewish lobby and the support of Christian Zionists. So this is a question about the US political economy and how it operates. But I think it's a disaster, the Gaza war, for America, because in the support of Israel, they have been viewed negatively in most parts of the world and by most people. It's too much. People feel it deep in their hearts that this is too much. It's too cruel what the Israelis are doing. And that the Israelis can only pursue this course of action because of American support. And we all know that in the end, Jews and Palestinians have to live side by side in that land and best in two states, where each can pursue his own destiny.
Hello, I'm an exchange student from the Netherlands, actually. Thank you for your talk. And I would like to ask you, my parents, they very much looked up to the United States as a role model after the Second World War. But for my young generation in Europe, it is different. And you have mentioned several political issues, whether it's technology, foreign policy, where we still see this US dominance, US-led world. And I personally believe the European Union and European countries have to mature, and we have to build our own foreign policy independently from the United States. And how would you assess current European foreign policy? And do you think we are able to completely mature and become an independent power in the 21st century? Thank you.
Macron a few years ago said that NATO was brain dead. Then, with the Ukraine war, NATO has become alive again. I'm not sure whether the transatlantic alliance can remain this strong. Because it's like a martial arts exponent, You think you can break the wall, so you give it all you've got, and the wall doesn't break. All that force feeds back into you and creates internal injury. So after all that effort, they are not winning in Ukraine. The result will be domestic upheaval in every European country and increasing resentment that they were being forced into positions by the US. If you are a German, you face much higher energy costs now, right? And you think that the pipelines were blown up either by the Americans or by friends of the Americans. And you're not even allowed to talk about it. No wonder the AfD is gaining in strength. And I think in many European countries, you will find right-wing parties gaining in strength. and the European transatlantic link will weaken. And if Trump comes in, it will weaken even further. Then Europe have to decide, how do we look after ourselves? The Franco-German alliance, should Europe expand or should we consolidate around the core? China wants Europe to succeed. China wants the euro to succeed because it wants Europe as a separate pole, separate door closed to the Americans. And the Europeans, if they play their cards right, can maintain the peace in the world. If the Americans move too much, the Europeans can say, no, we disagree. This will stop the Americans. If China is unreasonable, the Europeans should move closer to the Americans. Then China will have to change policy. So Europe is a balancer and can maintain peace in the world for years to come. This requires leadership. And at the core of that leadership is a Franco-German alliance. Macron is an intellectual, he's a philosopher, but he hasn't got a base. German politics is fragmented. And so we see no visible, strong European leadership today, nor in the immediate future.
Two elections are very, very important. One is Taiwan, one is the US. Which one you worry more?
Taiwan elections are a sideshow. It's not that important. Even like Xing Tebe to win, he can only do what the Americans allow him to do. He cannot start the war. Only the Americans can start the war. When he visited the US, they restricted the people he could meet. They restricted the places he could visit. And he was kept at a low profile. He cannot jump out from the American palm.
If there's a conflict between US and China over Taiwan, what Singapore will do?
Oh, Singapore will not take sides. Singapore will not take sides.
Really? Singapore has American military base.
I can't speak for the Singapore government. I've left government a long time ago. But in 1990, not long after I entered politics, the Americans were chased out from Clark and Subic by a new Filipino government. And Lee Kuan Yew was worried because at that time, we needed American presence in Southeast Asia to keep the waterways open and the air lanes open. So we offered the American Navy and Air Force use of our bases. And they were sending a survey team. She asked me to make the announcement in Parliament. And a second announcement later where we had an agreement with the Americans. It was very clear at the time that if there's war between between the US and China, over Taiwan, Singapore will not be involved. Now, whether that policy has changed since I left government, I do not know. But I see no profit for Singapore to do this. Yes, we buy US equipment. When I was head of Air Force planning, I bought bombs, I bought missiles. I'm familiar with the aeroplanes, the helicopters. And they can switch them off, the Americans. And our financial system can be strangled by the Americans. And Hong Kong understands this. But it doesn't mean that because you need Americans, you have to do everything the Americans tell you to do. So in 1994, many of you may still remember this. There's a bunch of kids who vandalized public property. They were sentenced and they were given strokes of the Rotan. One of them, Michael Fay, was given 6 strokes. Big rumpus in the US. Clinton objected, appealed. So in the end, we reduced from 6 strokes to 4 strokes. No, as a kind of concession to the US, but that same reduction was applied to everybody in that group who was sentenced at that time. For 3 years, Goh Chok Tong could not visit America. Right? So if as a small country, because you're dependent on Americans, you say, look, I do everything you ask me to do, you can't live your life. Well, at some point, you will say, no, do your worst and calculate.
Sure.
If you do your worst, is that in your interest?
Wow.
中意名家分析，記得俾 like 同埋分享，支持同訂閱卓見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁就唔會錯過我哋嘅新片。